First of all, I mean, you can start analyzing what your privilege is in that organization and use it for the greater good. As an example, if you have someone in a meeting or on your team that rarely speaks, and they're very quiet, they keep to themselves, they rarely say anything, and at some point maybe they mention something in a meeting, and everyone's used to them not talking, so they don't really pay attention to what that person says. You could just do like everybody else and just ignore. Or if you notice, you could ask everyone to stop for a second because you can hear what so and so said. You give them the spotlight because they've asked for it, but they won't really advocate for it all that much.
I'm Ravi Tangri. Welcome to SOULgineering, your life and your work. This is about how do you find those tiny little leverage points that allow you to bring more heart, more soul into all of your life, into your work, everything that you do. And today, my guest is Denny Boudreau, who is a trusted strategic advisor for disability and inclusion. Denis, welcome.
Thank you so much, Ravi. Happy to be here.
I'm delighted to have you on the show because this is such a huge issue right now, because when you're talking about inclusion, a lot of people a lot of times think the visible things, but there's also many invisible things we have to address, right? I know you and I are both members of the neurospicy world and other such elements. So what is it let's start off with, what is it that brought you to this place, to being this strategic advisor for organizations on disability and inclusion?
Well, I discovered the web in 1997 and it blew my mind. And very quickly, like 3 years into that job or that profession as a designer slash coder, I was asked by a project manager to figure out a way to build a website that blind people could use. And like nobody knew how to do that, and neither did I. And through research, I discovered that there were, rules and standards out there that helped people who were blind, people who had different types of disabilities, to be able to use the technology, the web, the internet, the way that the rest of us were using it. And it really blew my mind that this was something that people could not use or had a hard time using. And very quickly, I discovered that it wasn't that complicated to make a website for a blind person so that they could use it. And it became a passion of mine. And through the next 25-ish years or so, I've honed my skills to get better and better at explaining and demystifying how to do that so that everyone who lives with some kind of a disability can just take advantage of technology the way that the rest of us do, because most of us take this for granted. And when you can't use the technology, you're very quickly left behind in society. So it's become my goal to do that. And that's basically how I came to it in the first place. Just sheer, luck, I would say.
And so it's expanded from the web up to actually how we work in organizations as well.
Yes, exactly. So the first 15, 20 years or so, I was mainly focused on helping designers, developers, content creators, quality assurance testers, anyone involved, like any stakeholder involved in developing websites, designing websites, to make them more accessible and meet, different regulations and laws in Canada or the US or elsewhere. And very quickly, I realized, very quickly, over the last, 5 to 10 years or so, I started realizing that I was getting older. And as a result of that, it was getting harder and harder to talk to people who were younger in the industry because our age gap was growing. And I thought I should probably start talking more with their leaders, their executives, their bosses, their managers, and started shifting towards a more strategic approach to speaking about disability inclusion so that I could keep working with people that were getting older in the industry with me, and people who would have the same kind of references that I had. And that led me to work more with leadership over time and help them understand the winning conditions so that they can create the spaces that are conducive for their teams to successfully create accessible content. And that led me to work more with those same leaders in making the environments in which people operate more inclusive, more welcoming, more accommodating for workers, employees who have disabilities, invisible disabilities, neurodiversity, or this or that. All those things do impact communication and helping them better understand what that means so that they can create more inclusive workspaces for themselves and their teams.
All right. So I'd like to get into some of the things that we as individuals can do, but also those of us who are in a leadership role, business owners, leaders can be aware of to be more effective with their organizations, with meetings and such. But before that, I know you and I know some of the things about you, and I love people who ignore limits. And I'd like to dive into this quickly because one of the things that you did deal with, I know, is you're colorblind.
Yes.
And yet you were a designer for fashion, for clothing, and a web designer,
Yes.
despite the fact that you were colorblind. You could pick the colors for the suits, for the clothing, for the website, even though you couldn't see
Yeah.
all as a lot of people do.
Well, definitely not the same way that, other people do. I have my
Right.
own very personal perspective on what green and red mean, which is very different than most people. I would say that. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not even sure how that happened, to be honest with you. I mean, the fashion designer thing was in the mid-90s. I was looking for a job. This factory was hiring people. I ended up getting there, working in their office space, and very quickly was tasked with starting to track the different fabrics that we were using and all that stuff, and quickly realized that every fabric was coded. So I didn't really need to know whether it was green or brown or taupe or this or that. I just needed to know that this particular fabric's code was this or that. And because I was doing a good job, I guess, managing the fabrics, at some point they asked me if I was willing to help with defining the next line of products for the following season, and I did. And again, not knowing about the colors, and really not knowing, I mean, what do you match together and what works, I mean, which is why I always wear black, because that's simple. Like I never but in the context of that job, basically, I found myself over the course of a season or two to be in charge of defining the next collection for the next season. And all I had to do really was remember what those codes were. So there were hundreds of codes, but you had access to the books, right? So it was easy to figure that out. And every competitor that we have was going with the same vendors. So we're all referring to the same sources to begin with. So all I really needed to do was look at what our competitors had done. Those were the leading brands, because we weren't a leading brand. So what they were doing one season, I would just replicate that the following season, because our clients were much more conservative. So they were not the ones that were pushing trends. They were just following
Right.
those trends. So it was very easy to just recreate what others had done before using the same fabric numbers and matching them together. So for 4 years, that's 8 seasons, I basically, planned and managed the collections for a company, and no one there ever knew that I was colorblind. And my worst fear was that anyone would find out, because they would have fired me on the spot for sure. But
And
but
despite the fact you got the results.
I got the results, and I got the results really well. And that's just one of so many examples of how people with different types of disabilities, mostly invisible ones, will figure out a way to work around their challenges so that they can still perform. But in order for me to be able to do that back then, I put in 2 times, 3 times as much work just to be able to figure out how to work around those challenges. And that I think somehow that really had an impact on my trajectory as well, because I really understand from like an intrinsic perspective what it's like to have to struggle just to be able to do your job. Like figure
Right.
out ways to make things work so that you can do your job, and being able to speak to leaders as an example and help them understand that reality, that there's losses in so many different ways because people are just spinning their wheels just trying to get basic stuff done. And when we start looking at different perspectives or different approaches to allow people to do their jobs, if we give them that flexibility or the creativity to do that, then they come up with ideas and they can perform to the full extent of their potential. And that's
Right.
really what that was. And web developer, web designer, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I designing interfaces is not all that complicated, because again, technology is there to support you. I have learned over the years how to decode a color through RGB, so red, green, and blue. So
Right.
in on the web we use Xcode values, so I understand how that works. So I can write a color just by writing the right code in it, and there are tools out there that will help you create a color palette that fits with a particular color that you like. So I would pick a color or two, run that through a website. It would give me a palette, and that would be my color combinations. So I didn't really need to know that this was pink or hot red or whatever. I just needed to know that those were a nice match because so and so said so on their website, and that was it. So again, just
Okay.
working around the challenges.
So that's one part. That's how you did it. You translated the colors into the codes of which you could then make work together. You knew which ones worked together. But the other question I have about you, and please pardon me if this is blunt, but what is it that gave you the inside? I'm curious about the internal process that gave you, for lack of another word, the arrogance to believe you could do that right at the beginning when you started with the design, the clothing, that, okay, I'm colorblind, but I can do this. I can find a way. What was it in you that enabled you to take that step, if you think?
My first thought was, I have no idea, Ravi. But then, actually, I think I do. From for as long as I remember, I was told as a kid that I would not be able to do this or do that. Like I've always been told that. I mean, I remember as a kid, I was like, I want to be a cop one day, and then people were like, you can't be a a policeman. You'll never be able to tell which the color of the car you're chasing. Or I wanted to be an electrician at some point, and again, wires, and of course, people were saying, no, that's not a good idea. Like every single thing that I wanted to do, I like most young boys, I guess at some point I wanted to be like a bomb diffuser. Like that seemed like a really cool job, but again, don't cut the red in the wire, right? So all that stuff was always like, I don't know why I was always drawn to jobs where people would tell me you won't be able to do that because you're colorblind. And maybe somewhere internally I registered that as, oh, I can't do things. I'm limited. And as an adult, I decided that I wouldn't be limited and I would just push and push and push. And if I crash and burn, then I'll just do something else. And I think that's mostly it.
So when you say it sounds so simple, I decided I wouldn't be limited. Can you recall what it was that made you say no, no more limits? Can you recall what it was that, because that's we all have limits that we put on ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's around that time where I had that job at that clothing factory. Like I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like I really discovered what I wanted to do when I was 28. That's really late in life when all your friends are pretty much set and you're still the one just going from one odd job to the other. So I was really lost. And until I found the internet, like there was nothing that really interested me. So I was lucky in that way. But I had been struggling for years just figuring out like what is it that I want to do? What can I do? Like what am I good at? Like what am I interested in? And at some point and it was just enough. Like I need to commit to something. And that something was the web. And once I discovered that, there was nothing that would stop me from pushing as far as I could in that direction. So I think like it's not one thing as much as an accumulation of small little things, little frustrations over time that got me to a point where when I got to that job at the clothing factory, I was like, what do I have to lose? I mean, it's like a minimum wage job. It's like there's nothing special about this here, and I have an opportunity to do something that I think I like. And if it doesn't work, then there's a dime a dozen other jobs like that I could get anywhere else doing something else at minimum wage. So there wasn't a lot of risk there. But as I started doing that and discovering that I could work past my limitations in that way by being creative and finding ways to work around them, I guess somehow that inspired me. I guess. I mean, I never thought about that as I was doing it, obviously, but in retrospect, maybe that was part of it. And yeah, so I think that's just simple as that, really. Like over time, getting more tired and tired of being told no, being told I can't do this, and then thinking maybe I could. And to this day, I still think that you know diffusing bombs would not have been a good idea, or maybe even being an electrician probably wouldn't have been a good idea either, because you get shocks all the time if you mess up. But other than that, I mean, I think we are easily limited by what other people tell us, and I kind of decided not to be anymore as much as I could. Really, there's always things, of course. But for the most part, I'm like, no, if I feel like I shouldn't be doing it, I usually push through and try to do it and realize that, you know what, I actually could do that. And I actually did do that. And that reinforces that feeling of being fearless, I guess, in a way.
Okay. So let's go from there to people who are feeling that they have something that's holding them back, whether it's I hate the word disability or whatever, but
It's a
like
valid word.
you've got you're dealing with colorblindness. There could be something with neurodivergence. It could be a physical element. What are some thoughts that you might have for people of how they could just start to explore or push or nudge what seems possible for them?
So that's a big question. So it's different for everybody, right? I mean, if I look at my own challenges in that way, yes, colorblindness is one, but I score really high on ADHD. I score pretty high on autism as well. Like I have these traits that are very clearly defined. Every test I take, like I score significantly high in those areas. I'm just not someone who's socially awkward, therefore it doesn't come across that way. But my brain is wired in a way where the way that I think about things or the way that I interpret things sometimes is just like a little, left field. Let's put it this way. So what I would say is that for everyone, it's different. I mean, I've my work over the last 25 years has brought me to meet hundreds of people with disabilities, some of them very vocal, others not. And what I learned is that none of them are the same. They're all different. I mean, we're all different. Every human is. Disability is not different. You can meet 100 blind people and they're all going to have different perspectives on things. They're going to believe this or that. They're going to prefer this or that. And you just can't make generalizations all that much. I mean, to a certain degree you can, but as soon as you get to the individuals, none of that really holds water. So for anyone to feel like they can push beyond their perceived limits, I don't think it's so much about them themselves, but it's about the environment in which they operate or they evolve. And in disability inclusion, there's a couple of concepts that we work with all the time, and one of those concepts is the models of disability. And I'll make that very simple for you in this case here. With only two of those models, there's a bunch of them, but the typical model, the one that people think about, is the medical model, where the person has a disability, they're broken, they have a problem, and they have to work around fixing it. So that's not our problem. You're the one who's blind, let's say. And then the social model is basically that the issue is not with the person who has a disability. The issue is with the environment in which that person operates.
Right.
And that's obviously what I believe in as well. So, as an example, if we go back to what you brought up earlier about that clothing factory, the fact that I was colorblind was not a problem for that job. Once you realize that everything was coded and you could just work with the codes and, that would work. Or, someone in a wheelchair has no issues working in a building if there's a ramp leading to that building and every door is wide enough and the stalls and bathroom stalls are wide enough. Like if everything works for that person, everything's on the same floor, or you have elevators, they're not limited. But put them in an environment where there's stairs everywhere, of course they can't function.
Yeah.
It's not the person per se, it's the environment in which they operate. So to your question, as long as the environment in which the person operates is welcoming and free of bias, and people have open conversations and transparency and respect about the differences, and they welcome and even celebrate those differences because they bring different perspectives that contribute to a broader vision of what we offer as a business, then there's no issue. And people with disabilities in those environments will naturally disclose what their challenges are. They're more likely to do that because they trust that they're going to be welcomed with respect and dignity and everything. But most organizations aren't like that. Most organizations have people talking or bickering and saying things behind other people's backs, and you hear people say that, and you're like, oh, what are they saying about me when I'm not around?
Right.
And if you are dyslexic, if you are, you have ADHD, maybe you're the person who's perceived as the one who never reads the reports. And the reason why you don't read the reports is, dyslexia, and you can't really get to do that. Or maybe you're the annoying one in meetings because you're always fidgeting, but that's actually ADHD. And the reason why I'm fidgeting at that much is because your meetings are so boring. I mean, we spend an hour sitting here just listening to you yap all the time, and I need to be active. I need to do something. And the only way that I can channel my energy is by fidgeting with something or, tapping, stomping my foot or something. So you can perceive that as being annoying, or you can say, oh, so and so, yeah, all right, yeah, he's got ADHD. We should probably rethink our meetings a little bit so that we're a bit more active. That person would benefit, but so would everybody else, right? So
Right.
when you adapt everything, when you adapt the environment for someone with a particular situation or condition, typically everyone benefits from that as well. I mean, going back to the example of the dyslexic person, if you call a meeting and we have to read this 10-page document before the meeting and you send that an hour before the call, chances are most people will quickly go through it because that's their job, but that person won't be able to do that because they don't have enough time. Send that content way before and offer that content in multiple formats. Yes, you can read it, but here's, a version, there is an accessible version of that document that I could read through a screen reader, for instance. So I could have the document read out to me by technology. If I use AI to extract the content and get a summary of it, like if I do those things, I'm going to be able to, make up for the fact that reading is a difficult activity for me. If you
Yeah.
give me flexibility, I'll step up to, the expectations. If you don't, then I'm stuck trying to figure out how to do this. And that's the big reason why people don't disclose or don't come out. They mask all the time because it's not safe for them to disclose anything about themselves. And that's what I
Right.
try to fix by working with these leaders, essentially.
And we don't think about it because, you talk, where I go to, my son has got himself recently diagnosed with ADHD, and he's in an amazing organization that's so supportive, but they had a town hall where they had to sit for 2.5 hours, and he was like, oh, it was so hard to, and so you had conversation with them. But the thing is that it's, to have that ability to move, to walk, to get up, breaks, all this sort of stuff, which we don't think about, but also conditioned through schooling, which is
Mhm.
that way, sit and take it in. But and here's the interesting thing. I believe a huge number of entrepreneurs skew towards ADHD because
It's not
the nine to
unusual.
five doesn't work for them.
Yeah, it's not unusual at all. But I mean, here's a parallel for you. So let's say you're a business and you sell T-shirts. And you decided, because it would be simpler for you to do that, that you're going to have one size of t-shirt, one model. It's a one size fits all. That's what we get. That's what we sell. Take it or leave it. Some people will think that it works for them because they happen to be like a medium or a large, let's say, and it fits quite well. But bodies are very different, so it's only going to fit a certain portion of the population as a result of that. So we understand that a one size fits all solution is not appropriate for something like that. And yet somehow when it comes to how we run our businesses, how we run our meetings, how we run our events, how we run everything, we have this, here's how we do it. And that's it. And we shoot for the average, the common denominator, the average user, the average audience member, and this and that. And we forget that, past that bell curve, like the trailing ends of that bell curve, all those people are basically left out.
Yeah.
And if you instead rethink it, where you're like, let's start by thinking about the people on the ends of that bell curve and what they need. If you do that, and if you pay attention to what those folks are, people with disabilities, people that are older, people that have issues with technology, people that have severe anxiety, like if you build something for those folks first, the middle of your bell curve will take care of itself naturally. The events will be easier. The meetings will be more dynamic. Like all these things where you're going to benefit from as well. But all of a sudden, you're allowing all the other folks to also take part because it's more akin to their reality as a result of that.
And you'll have better solutions. I do a lot of work with innovation. That comes from all different perspectives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to get to what we can do individually. You've talked a little bit about that, how we can change organizationally. I want to throw something at you. My first contract when I started my business 33 years ago was with the government to look at barriers to employment for people with disabilities.
Okay.
And I found this was fascinating. The biggest the biggest barrier was employment equity.
I can
Because
see
if
that.
someone with a disability did well and got promoted, that person lost their quota. And so then they had to fill it again with someone with a disability.
Yeah.
And so they did not allow people with disabilities to advance. What are your thoughts on that? And is this something that you've encountered?
Yes, definitely to both questions. First of all, there's an obvious issue with prejudice and bias when you're not being promoted because you fit a quota. The other issue with that obviously is also that it's in terms of representation. If you don't see anyone higher up in the organization who has a visible disability or has an invisible one but speaks about it casually, then you can't really perceive yourself being higher up in that company. Like nobody looks like you. So that's an obvious problem there. Generally speaking, the issue is not so much that if you promote that person, then you lose your quota here, because you could always hire more people. There's a ton of really talented and competent people out there who have invisible disabilities. Most of them you would hire and not even know that they have that disability, and it might come up at some point, because the disability doesn't just end because you found a job. It's still there. One of the clients that I work with right now, it's a bank, and we're analyzing the whole process from hiring to welcoming into a team, for instance, and looking at the gaps in there. And what we find is that, individually, everyone is on board with the idea of hiring people with disabilities. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, it's 27% of the population in Canada. Of course, it's going to be a percentage of people in the workplace as well. We all agree, pretty much, research agrees that about 20% of people in employment, I mean, employees, have some kind of an invisible disability or neurodiversity. Like, it's 1 out of 5, roughly. And those numbers are pretty much backed everywhere you look for data like that. But the thing is, like, no one's against virtue, right? So of course, I want to give people someone a chance and this and that. But then once you get to a point where you're like, okay, so if I hire that person, then I have to do this, I have to do that, like, then I have to do a couple of things more, then it adds to your plate, which is already full. So people are going to unconsciously lean towards the person who's less trouble as a result of that,
Yes.
instead of just thinking as an organization, so how could we make it possible for someone to be hired that way and not make it an extra burden for people internally that are already there, because we work together to make it work.
Okay.
And it's a question of choice. It's a question of priorities, basically. But a lot of people are not promoted. A lot of people are not hired in the first place because of the perceived, additional burden that this will create. While in most cases, it actually does not do that. It just requires you to think a little differently and accept that not everything works the way that you're used to. Because
Yeah.
one says fit doesn't fit all.
Yeah, I think we're used to, let's get into a routine and it's comfortable and I don't want to change it. And so you mentioned, it's interesting. You mentioned you're working with a bank. I have a friend who got diagnosed late in life, just a few years ago, with strong ADHD. And he researched thoroughly, developed all sorts of compensatory strategies, but it took him a few years to talk to his boss because he was scared about what would happen if he did, and to ask for, here are the things I need to work more effectively. Some of the things you mentioned about, more time to digest material, all of these sort of things. How can, for those who are in a leadership position or running organizations, how can we make it safer for people to open up and have these conversations with us so that we can actually do some of this?
It begins with education. It begins with acknowledgement. It begins with support. Yeah, that's what it begins with. I mean, you can't expect someone who has been working or joins a work environment where they either don't know anyone or they know people to be, you know, judging of or criticizing of others, to spontaneously, come out and mention, what their conditions are. That just doesn't happen. I mean, for the exact reasons that you mentioned with your friend, and for the exact reasons that I mentioned with that job in the 90s, where, like, there was no way I would trust anyone to not fire me if they knew about that. So the only way to change this is really by changing the behaviors internally. Like, you as a leader, for instance, you need to begin by coming to terms with the fact that disability is a dirty word, and we can say those things, and those are perfectly valid word, and those are perfectly valid conditions as well. They're not normal. They're maybe atypical, but there's a difference there. And normalizing, disability is where it begins. So that means that you don't have to go out and start reading a bunch about disabilities just in case one day someone shows up at your doorstep. But if you suspect someone to maybe have, a particular condition, read a little bit about that and just be open and talk to these things. Like, you hear someone say something that would be discriminating or that shows obvious bias, bring it up. You don't have to scold a person, but you can just bring it into conversation. Like, what do you mean about that, for instance? Or why would you think that? Or, whatever way you want to do that. But if I, as an example, like, let's say I'm dyslexic. I'm not, but let's say I am. And that's my big dark secret. And all of a sudden, I see people being more open about different formats. I see people not requiring content to be read this particular way. I see that we are changing. The fact that people are talking about how, this is just another thing that's normal and we just need to include that and not make a big deal about it. Over time, I'm going to start trusting that, oh, maybe I could just disclose something about myself. And inevitably, at some point, someone will. And when that person does, it encourages others to do the same. So it's like a snowball effect over time. But it always begins with leaders or thought leaders or people in positions of authority or influence in the organization to step up, stop walking on eggshells around these questions, and just speak of it like they speak of other things, and say, this is just part of the new normal. Because you're not broken if you have a disability. Your brain is wired differently, for sure. But as you mentioned, people with different types of disabilities can and do become very successful people regardless. It's just that, school wasn't built for them the way that school is run, was not built for them like it wasn't built for me. And that didn't prevent me from being successful in life later. But I was pretty miserable at school for a long time because it didn't really fit what I needed. And the same would be true for a bunch of people who've succeeded in their businesses or other areas of in their careers as at a later age. So it really does begin with that. It begins with the organization, the culture shifting, and people being more welcoming and respectful of these differences, so that when someone builds the courage to speak up, they're not being just, discarded or pushed back on, and instead welcomed. And that builds more confidence for others to do the same. And then it shifts over time.
Okay. Just sort of like to finish off with, like, that's from the organizational leadership point of view, but as individuals, how can we, a couple of thoughts on how can we become more open, more receptive, make it safer for people to speak to us about any challenges they have? How can we support them and create the support and space for them?
So what you're talking about is being an ally, basically. So allyship is what we're talking about. There's a million ways to do that. First of all, I mean, you can start analyzing what your privilege is in that organization and use it for the greater good. As an example, if you have someone in a meeting or on your team that rarely speaks, and they're very quiet, they keep to themselves, they rarely say anything, and at some point maybe they mention something in a meeting, and everyone's used to them not talking, so they don't really pay attention to what that person says. You could just do like everybody else and just ignore. Or if you notice, you could ask everyone to stop for a second because you can hear what so and so said. You give them the spotlight because they've asked for it, but they won't really advocate for it all that much, as an example. Or how many times have you seen this? I've seen that countless times, right? Where someone says something like that, nobody really pays attention. Somebody else says the exact same thing, and all of a sudden they reinvented, sliced bread, and they take all the credit for it. But if you witness that, you say, well, that's interesting, but isn't that exactly what, Janet said 2 minutes ago? And you bring it back to the person who actually deserves that. Doing stuff like that is very powerful in terms of helping other people grow more confidence in their ability to actually provide or contribute something of value. You could simply, again, educate yourself on accommodations. I mean, what is it that you would need in order to be able to be successful? Like, what is it that doesn't work for you? If you're like a team, like a colleague, or if you're that person's manager, instead of just saying, "Oh, you can't. Why can't you do that job?" Like, what would you need? Like, what is the barrier that you run into that we could maybe fix. And what people think all the time is that, accommodations are, they're like, it's a special treatment for the person. Like, oh, you get a benefit. I mean, you have flexible hours or this or that. If someone, required to work different hours for whatever reason, we would all say that's not fair. Let's not do that. But if you understood that the reason why the person requires to start at 10 in the morning instead of 9, for instance, because they have to get to the office, is that, on Mondays and Wednesdays, they have to be at the hospital at 7 and they need the time. Of course you'd accommodate that. But if you think that the person is just lazy and they want to get up later in the morning, then of course you won't want to do that. But if you don't know why, you make assumptions about things. So maybe that's the biggest thing I would say. If you want to be a good ally for people with disabilities, stop making assumptions about everything and try to understand why the behavior is the way that it is. You could have someone you just, in the middle of a meeting will just stand up and walk out. And, why is that? Or someone takes regular breaks throughout the day and like, are they ever working? That's what we would be thinking very naturally. But it might be that the person who walks out of the meeting is because, the room has this lighting that really makes them that causes them a headache and they just can't deal with it anymore. So they have to walk out. That would be my ex, for instance. I had that issue. If we had neon lights somewhere, she could not stay in that room for more than 5 or 10 minutes before like these massive headaches started. I can't understand that, but I can respect it. And if someone, goes to the bathroom 25 times a day, maybe they go and they take medicine there because they don't want to do that in front of everybody else. They want their privacy. Right. But if you don't know that again, you're thinking, oh, these people are lazy. They're just always walking around and doing other things. And that's what we do as collectively as humans. That's what we do, make assumptions all the time. So if you want to be a better ally, start to question why people do what they do instead of deciding why they do what they do. And don't assume things. And that's going to make a big difference just there.
It's funny. There's so much. One thing that's under a lot of what you said is one thing that bugs me that I believe is totally archaic, that outside of certain jobs where you do need to be somewhere to interact with people, people focus on hours, not output. And to me, it's as long as the person produces, does it matter if they're there 40 hours or 20? Irrelevant if they're producing the output.
Yeah, exactly.
And so many people cannot get their heads around that and such. But yeah, I mean, we could go on and on for that for a while.
But that's about control, right? I mean, that's the main reason why people also, leaders in organizations, CEOs and such, that's why they want people back in the office, not because it's more. Yeah, it's just control. I mean, you want to make sure that people work for every hour that you pay them. That's what you want. And people are less likely to just do other things, do laundry or this or that if they're sitting at their desk all day.
Well, even though productivity went up after people started working at home in the hybrid office, they're bringing them back, which to me is so brain dead. It's bonkers. But you're absolutely right. It's micromanagement control, and they're not trusting. And what's going to happen is either productivity is going to tank or the good people are going to leave, or both.
Exactly. Or both. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So there is a resource you have for people to help them determine how objectively, how inclusive they are. We're going to get to that.
Check it out. Check it out. Oh, are you ready for this?
But right now, I'd like to jump into our lightning round to wrap things up, Denis.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. So this is no thinking loud, just first thing that pops. And we've touched on some of these, but let's, introvert or extrovert?
Introvert, very much so.
What's the most favorite job you've ever had?
The one I have right now.
Good. Okay. What's the goofiest thing you've ever done?
Hitchhiked in the middle of a lake because I fell off the boat and I was hoping that the guy would pick me up. So I just hitchhiked so I would get his attention. So he would pick me up and bring me back to the shore.
Okay. What's the best compliment you've ever received?
That I'm passionate.
Nice. What's your biggest failure and what did you learn from it?
My biggest failure and what did I learn from it? I want to say it took me way too long to become assertive about my abilities because of all the perceived limitations that I was told I had.
And what did you learn from that?
That I shouldn't do that. That I should just trust myself and that, with a little bit of creativity, you can work around most things. Most things, not everything,
Yeah.
but
Takes a while sometimes to build that trust.
yeah, for sure.
And we've sort of maybe touched on this. As a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I'm going to go with diffusing bombs. That was
Okay. What's your most important ritual?
It's a new one, actually. It comes from a friend of ours, Robin O'Grady.
Mm-hmm.
She was saying how every morning she begins her day by planting both of her feet on the ground and just like feeling the ground underneath her feet and like rooting herself, have a sip of water, and then start going. I've been doing that for a couple of months, and I do think it helps somehow. So,
Very cool.
yeah.
Who do you admire?
Who do I admire? So this is going to be cheesy, so maybe I have another answer after that, but I admire my kids for all the things that they do
Nice.
and all the things that they try to do or that they dare to do. They're much smarter, they're much more adventurous than I was when I was their age, and I admire that about them. And then on a professional level, I would say I admire not a person in particular, but someone who chooses to do things their own way and not follow the norms in general and just say, no, this is how I want to do it. And then they still succeed. That I
Yeah.
admire a lot.
I
Yeah.
love it. How do you nourish yourself?
By going to the movies.
Ah,
Yeah. My life is spent in front of my computer way too much. So for a change, I like to go to a different screen, I guess. I'm not someone who exercises a lot these days. I keep thinking that I should exercise more, but I don't. But the only time that I really unplug is if I just sit in a really dark movie theater on this huge screen and then I just lose myself in 2 hours of something. That's what replenishes me.
yeah.
Replenishes me every week. Like I need that every week.
Love it. What do you want to be remembered for?
Someone who cared and made a difference for a quarter of the population that are being left out all the time, left behind all the time. If I can somehow contribute to that, if I can leave some kind of a legacy around that, job's done. I can go.
I love it. And what's your purpose in life?
It's definitely inclusion. Like I said at the beginning, and when I discovered that blind people couldn't use the internet, like this is not fair. So I have this strong sense of justice inside of me for some reason. I don't know where it comes
Mm-hmm.
from, but I'm easily upset by inequalities, injustice. So yeah, that's mostly it. Like I need to feel like I'm making a difference in that sense.
Love it. And so now, Denis, if people want to reach you, your website is inclusive.ca. That's INKLUSIV. Um, but you also have a special self-assessment that they can do,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, so if anyone's curious about their own leadership skill set when it comes to disability inclusion or just inclusion in general, I guess you'll share the link to the tool in your notes there. But basically, it's a 5-question assessment, and then every time that you reload the page, it's 5 other questions. So there's hundreds of questions on there that you can basically go through. Everything's on a Likert scale, so going from never to always. And it's questions about different things that you do or don't do. And then it helps you identify where some of your gaps might be. It's a free tool. I mean, all you need to do is leave your email address so that you can get the results. And then you get on the mailing list, but I don't spam anybody. Like I just send a couple of things every now and then. But it's really meant as a tool to help you identify where your gaps are. And typically with my clients, what I do is they begin with assessments like these, and then we define where they are on a maturity scale from 0 to 5. And then that allows us to build either a roadmap for where to go next to keep improving on that skill set. Think of it as professional development, or look at things that they should know at that point, but still haven't quite figured it out so that we can backfill those things. And basically it's about building a roadmap to help you understand more about disability inclusion and how it affects your bottom line, how it affects your employees' morale, how it affects engagement and all these different things, employee turnover and all that.
I love that. So thank you, Denis, for joining me. So grateful for this. And I mean, you are the person top of mind whenever I'm thinking about this for meetings, for presentations, for whatever I do. So grateful you could share your wisdom with us.
You're very kind sir.
And thank you for joining us. And I will see you next week on SOULgineering, Your Life and Work.
I got the energy, it's all I need to finish. And everyone that knows me knows that